Welcome back to part 2 of the third episode of Flat Earth by John Lash.
Yes, picking up where we left off, talking about what I call the phenomorphic properties of the world event. And I'd like to give an example of these. I'd like to give many examples. In fact, the book has numerous examples. Obviously, I can't elaborate that far in this talk. But I will bring up one really amusing example. Now, this is not necessarily advisable. I present this with caution, but it's an illustrative case coming from Terence McKenna, who was perhaps the most famous psychonaut of the 20th century.
More famous than Timothy Leary?
Much more famous than Timothy Leary, much more respected, right? So I want to ask you to recall what I said at the very beginning of the first part. What are we doing here? We're using the occasion of the flat Earth debate, flat Earth spherical Earth, to investigate the observer-observed interaction. And I pointed out that it works both ways. The observer affects what is observed, and what is observed, namely the world event, call it a planet, call it a planetary animal, call it a planetary amoebic mass, affects you, the observer. So I'll give you a really amusing anecdote from Terence McKenna describing the way that the observer affects the field observed.
I've got a good personal story about that.
Oh, great. Well, you can follow up with that. Now, I have to advise, I think that Terence had this experience when he was on DMT. Now, I don't approve of DMT, and I've spoken of it on several occasions. And I think that Terence was reckless and possibly did himself harm by the enormous amounts of DMT that he took. That's chemical DMT. He also took DMT in the natural form of ayahuasca. But I believe he reported this from an account of a DMT trance that he was in. Terence said that he was standing there or sitting there, presuming that his eyes were open. They might not have been. And he saw what people typically see in such cases. He saw this massive field of streaming forms. This massive field of like that scene in 2001 when the astronaut is descending, into
Space Odyssey.
Space Odyssey, when he's descending to Jupiter. And he said that, of course, you're sitting there, you have to picture him sitting there like with his jaw a little bit hanging open. You're absolutely stunned because it's a rush, it's a flood of all these forms. And as he's observing this, he had what I suppose to be Castaneda's voice of seeing. Castaneda describes this phenomenon that happens in shamanic trance called the voice of seeing. And it's like this voice that comes in like a tour guide, and it's like commenting to you on what you're seeing. And you sort of know it's your mind, but in a way it's not quite your mind. So humoristically, it's kind of like a touristic guide that tells you what you're seeing. So there was Terence in front of this magnificent display, and he noticed that everything that he saw when he moved his head and he looked up and down was a vast field presented in the decor of Aztec architecture, Aztec Maya architecture.
Which is a common experience, isn't it?
Quite common. In fact, I would say that on a good many of my telestic adventures, alone and also with others, that when the rush comes on, and you start to go into the trance, one of the first things you notice is that everything has this Aztec look about it. Okay? So this is not unusual, not unique to Terence. Anyway, so he's sitting there in this vast field of vibrant, powerful forms, monumental forms, and they kind of rush at you. And they're all in Aztec motifs. And suddenly the voice of seeing, nudges him and says, well, Aztec, huh? Well, why Aztec? How about Baroque? And so at that moment, I don't know if he pronounced the word Baroque aloud or if he just said Baroque in his mind, but he said Baroque as if it was a command, and suddenly the entire decor became Baroque. And he was in a vast field of Baroque architecture. So he thought, well, this is pretty neat. What's next? And I think the next event was Art Deco. But you see where this is going. This is an example of the observer affecting the field that is observed. That can only happen in a non-ordinary state. You cannot do this in an ordinary state of consciousness.
I had an experience where I realised, as the observer, I could affect what I was observing, which in turn affected me. This wasn't in a telestic trance. I just arrived in Andalusia at your old house, where you're looking out, the upper terrace is looking over the Straits of Morocco. You've got the whole sky, Milky Way, in front of you. And I noticed there was a light in the sky that started moving. So, airplane. Oh, no, it's not an airplane. It's moving very strangely. So it was erratic moving, then it would slow down, then it would drift off to the left, slow down, then moves quickly to the right. And started in that kind of pattern. So I showed you, because we observe the night sky a lot. You've done it for a really, really long time, and you've taught all your students to do it. And so we watched it for a little bit, and then you kept popping in and out of the house, and I stood watching the lights. And then after about half an hour, I realised I could manipulate the light. I could say to the light, just through my perceiving it, I could say, okay, move again. And it would move again. Stop. It would stop. Move again. And I played with this light in the sky for another half an hour.
So could you describe that as kind of like a telepathic command, in a sense?
Yes, it was. I didn't command it vocally. It was
Right.
a telepathic command.
Right. Well, these are experiences that can happen spontaneously to people and have happened. I had an experience in Nepal where I interacted with a moving star. And I'm sure that it was not a UFO archonic thing. It was actually a star that moved. And it caught my attention. And then there was, depending on how I observed it, its motion was in response to my observation. And I'm sure there are many people listening who can relate anomalous experiences of this kind. So what does that all indicate? It indicates that there is a liminal condition, a liminal state, that is a boundary zone, a margin, and you can be drawn into that state and you can have these anomalous phenomena happen. The problem is then what interpretation that you attach to them. So at this point, I can sense an objection that comes up. As you know me pretty well, my method is that I'm perhaps too self-critical and that I always think of the objections that could be raised to what I say. Sometimes I dismiss these objections because they're idiotic and trivial, but occasionally they're worth addressing because something can be learned from them. So I can hear the objection that goes like this. Well, Terence McKenna was stoned on DMT and he was hallucinating all these fluid forms, which everyone reports. And he was convinced in his state of intoxication that he could interact with his mind, with what he was perceiving, but he was delusional and he was just hallucinating.
People could say the same thing about you in Celestic Shamanism, interacting with Sophia.
Sure they can. They're welcome to say that. But here is my response to that objection. Fine. If you want to say that Terence McKenna, who was certainly under the influence of a psychoactive substance, was hallucinating the world event that he witnessed, I'll tell you that you're hallucinating the world event that you're witnessing right now. You're hallucinating the world event. The only difference is that if you're not intimate and interactive with the world event, it appears to you like something stable and objective that is not affected by your mind and your perception. That's a delusion. That's a limit. I would also add that the very power that you describe of interactivity in a biofeedback loop, that very power which Terence was exercising when he said Baroque, Art Deco, Venetian, is given to you by the same power that gives you the ordinary perception of the world. Except the ordinary perception is the default setting, and it doesn't change. And it's designed that way so you can function as a being in a culture, in a shared social reality with other people.
A being that needs to find shelter, find food.
Operate by habit, operate by reliable standards. Okay, you're in the known world. You're designed to function in the known world, but you also have the ability to go into the unknown world, into the nahual, which is the unknown, into the transcendental. So, Terence coined this term, it's the title of one of his books, true hallucination. The world as it is right now, to your ordinary perception, it's an hallucination, but it's a true hallucination. You could say, well, he was using DMT, which is a chemical substance that alters his consciousness. Well, what haven't you taken today that alters your consciousness? Coffee, tea, soya, the air you breathe, the water you drink, everything you take into your body alters your consciousness as much as DMT alters your consciousness. So, you've got to level the playing field here, It's the same world event both ways. All depends on how you spin it, you see, and how it spins you.
Would you care to qualify that though?
In what way?
Drinking tea and coffee alters your consciousness the same as DMT does?
Not in the same way, but it is a profound alteration of consciousness of the body-mind instrument to take anything into the body-mind instrument. What happens when yogis in the classical scenario go sit in a cave and meditate, or a yogi undergoes a fast? What happens in a fast? You don't take anything into your body, and you go into an altered state of consciousness because your body is responding to the absence of those chemical influences.
Well, it's
coffee, smoking.
Yeah, it's the same if you do a Vipassana retreat.
Is it?
You only eat very lightly twice a day, so you're fasting for 12 hours, and you're not allowed to speak, and no one is allowed to speak. So you're also fasting of sound and noise and speaking. So you go into an altered state of consciousness.
Indeed, that's the case, and I would observe that whatever's to be gained from the flat earth, spherical earth debate, if there could be one, would have to involve, to be productive, it would have to involve some discussion of altered states of consciousness. So on that note, I'd just like to say something about Maya, because the word true hallucination, or the word hallucination, suggests Maya. Now, I've said this about Maya many times through the years, and I'm going to repeat it again. You know what I'm going to say.
Well, yeah, because people think that Maya means... That's what Maya is explained as in yoga philosophy books, is that Maya is the veil of illusion.
Yes, and the one very traditional and long-standing paradigm from Veda and Vedanta asserts that the world is an illusion, like a mirage, okay? I do not hold to that view at all, and I object very strongly to that view. So, I've often said that Maya does not mean illusion. It's actually from the Sanskrit root ma, which is connected to a verb that means to measure, or to dose, or to dimensionalize. So the world is Maya in the sense that it is a very great reality that is dosed out in various dimensions, but it's not an illusion, it's not a fake or a mirage. It's real.
Dosed out how the observer can take it.
Yeah, dosed out according to what the observer can take, you see. So when I use the word hallucination, don't equate it with Maya, with illusion, because Maya does not mean illusion. Maya means an apparition. Apparition. You're living in an apparition. This apparition is, however, sensually, sensorially, and materially totally fucking real. There's nothing illusory about it at all. It's the power of the imagination of the pleroma eons to materialize whatever they intend. That's the difference between human and divine imagination. If I imagine something, like my book, not in his image, I imagined the book, you could say, before I wrote it, then I have to go through a long process to produce what I imagine. But a pleromic being, an aeon like Sophia, immediately manifests materially what she imagines. That is called Maya Shakti in the Vedantic texts. So, Maya is not illusion, and in my view, the best definition of what Maya is the living dream of the earth. You are in Maya, you are in the living dream of the earth, whatever its shape may be. So on that note, we come around the bend. I would like to read just 2 short paragraphs from my unpublished manuscript, and then we'll proceed from there. How's that sound?
Good.
All right? This is from, I don't know, chapter 1 or 2 or something. This will give you an example of how I handled the flat earth, some of the flat earth arguments, not to refute them or discount them, but to use them to get to learn something, to draw something out of them. Flat earthers argue, quote, if the earth were really spherical, this is how things are supposed to act in physical terms. Buildings would visibly lean. The curvature computed according to geometrical laws would be detectable. The ball in the airplane would move at 500 miles per hour when you drop it. And you would feel the ground spinning beneath your feet if the earth were spherical. This is some of the arguments they present. But the way objects behave and events happen in nature is due to nature's design, not due to what the human mind thinks nature is supposed to be doing. Due to the way the mind of nature designs your perception, the great fact is just what nature does, period. That's the great fact we are here to penetrate, to investigate, and to enjoy. Just what it does, not what you think it's supposed to do, according to a spherical or disc world.
Or how.
Or how, right. More specifically, what it does contrasted to what the human mind expects it to do. So what you find in many of the flat earth arguments is that they're talking about what they would expect, how they would expect physics to behave if it were a spherical world. But that's not what it's about. And there is a great deal about what nature does and how the earth appears that humans are not enlightened to, that humans are not able to realize unless they see the mirroring and phenomorphic properties of the cosmos. So this debate is a doorway to the mirroring and phenomorphic properties of the world event, at best. Second paragraph. The trick of the flat earthers is to argue, if you cannot explain how it happens that curvature observed does not comply with geometric law, the lack of an alternative explanation is taken as proof that the earth is flat. Round earthers, on the other hand, show their inadequacy by dismissing the properties of appearance that support flat earth theory as trivial and extraneous to the world event. But the properties of appearance are not extraneous to the world event. They are inherent to the way you are designed to interact with the world event. In reality, these properties are clues and cues to that aspect of the phantomorphic field, which is its mirroring power, which is called vimarsha. So, end quote. So you get an idea of what the feeling of the book was like from that paragraph. Hope I haven't put anyone to sleep with that. Probably. Put a few people in a coma. Oh well, that's the risk of being an Gnostic teacher. So finally, we're going to close now, come around the bend, and we're going to talk about two things that are lacking in the flat earth paradigm. But I'm not going to bring that up to, rag on the flat earth people, because they're lacking entirely. In fact, the whole flat earth argument is valuable by bringing to our attention something that we lack, something that we, the human species, lacks. And that is a cosmography and a cosmology. Cosmography means a description of the cosmos. I've been giving you a description here, Sorcerer's description. And cosmology means a story of its origin. How did it come to be? How is it assembled?
Well, yeah, because that's something I've never heard a flat earther explain. Explain the plane.
Yeah.
Explain the plane. Who put it there?
Yeah. If we are living in a kind of circular disc world Petri dish, where we can't see the bottom or we can't see the rim, but it's covered over by a dome, and in the dome there are these various lights which are kind of like props, like devices in the Truman Show. If we're living in that kind of setting, well, how did that come to be? How was that created?
Not all flat earthers say that. That's
not all of them say that. So what I'm saying is, it's great that the flat earthers, as far as I know, haven't provided a cosmography or a cosmology, because it wakes you up to the fact that, wait, we don't have one anyway. We don't have a viable one anyway. Except we do. Indeed we do. And that is the Sophianic vision story. And I want to emphasize that the Sophianic vision story is a visualization in progress. All you can do is visualize. We're visualizing the center of the galaxy, the four-arm spiral galaxy, the brilliant, pearly, luminous, nougat-like plume bursting out of the core of the galaxy, rushing across the galactic limbs, ending in the third galactic arm, curling like the end of a fiddlehead fern into an embryonic spiral that turns into the planet Earth. You visualize this. We're visualizing a cosmology of a living Earth. And this visualization can be shared, can be talked about, discussed, created, recreated over and over again, and tested. You know, in ancient times, or in medieval times, let's not even go back to ancient times, planets were considered to be animals. Now, the ancients knew that the planets were different from the stars, but did they know that the star is a certain kind of body and the planet is another kind of body? One of the things I love about this debate is it raises a great question, which to me is thrilling as a cosmologist. You see these books here on the floor, right? How many of these do I have? History of Astronomy from Thales to Kepler, Skywatcher, Shamans and Kings, books on Aztec and Maya cosmology, Astronomy of the Ancients. How many of these do I have? 50?
Oh, much more than, yeah. Many.
I can tell you that not in any one single of these books does the author explain how it came to be that people came to the conception of a planet. I mean, you can go and look at the Dresden Codex of the Maya. You can go look at the Aztec, remnants of the Aztec astronomy, which is absolutely impeccable. They tracked the cycles of Venus as accurately as we do today. But what was actually happening when the Aztecs and Maya observed Venus and saw it move against the background of the fixed stars? What were they thinking? How did they visualize Venus? Did they visualize it as, quote, a planet? End quote. Did they know that they were on a planetary body, observing another planetary body? Not one author in any of these books, or in any book I've ever read, has explained that, has answered that question. And I would say that it's a happy day. We stand on the threshold of asking that question. You know, the Telestic method is all about asking questions. True science is all about asking questions. So it's time that we ask that question. And that's a very profound question of common interest to as many people as would care to be involved in this investigation. You know, so there you have it, you know. The Flat Earth debate brings attention to this question. Well, how did we ever perceive the world's setting as a planet in the first place? You can imagine that there are people who lived and died in generations and cultures who lived and died in the world setting, remember the terminology, and never formed the conception that the world setting was a free-floating planetary body, spherical, nor the conception that it was a world disk, stationary, at the center of the universe. Neither conception. Is it possible that these conceptions of the shape of the planet are now coming up for review? Well, I put it to you, that's because she's calling our attention to her. The Sophianic vision story is out there. Her cosmology, her narrative is out there. And the planetary animal mother wants her children to see her. She wants her children to visualize her. Visualize your mother. How do you visualize your cosmic mother? Well, I pointed out that we use the term Pam. We love that term. We call her Pam, right? It's like you call animals by different names. How many different names do you have for your cat? 4 or 5 at least, right? Pet names for each other we call them. Pam is a pet name for the earth, whatever the earth is, whatever its shape is. Planetary animal mother. Why animal? Well, in the annals of medieval astronomy, it's very clear that they consider the planets to be animals. They call them animals, sky animals, meaning animated, alive. We're talking animism, which is the natural state of perception of the human creature, animistic. But you could equally say PAM stands for planetary amoebic mass. Now I propose a visualization like this. Maybe both sides of the argument could get on board this visualization. If you go to EU, Electric Universe, Plasma Cosmology, you begin to get a picture of like a biological medium, that the galaxy and the great spaces where the solar system and planets move is a biological medium, like a bloodstream. So there are plasmic rivers and plasmic currents, and there's a lot of water out there too, by the way. And I like to point out that what's the natural shape that water assumes? Drops. So the argument for the spherical shape is based on a massive persuasion in the human mind about the natural formations of spheres. Teardrops, water drops, rain, snowballs, hail. The human embryo is spherical. The human eye is spherical. Now, as I'm looking at your eye, I could say, well, you're a flat eye. You know, you only have your eye is flat on the side that I can't see, right? You have kind of a protuberance and it's flat. Well, it's not. Your eye is round. Eggs are round. So there's a tremendous persuasion to see the cosmos in spherical terms. And I'll come to that at the end of this talk. I come to what I consider to be, as a shaman, the ultimate visual metaphor. But let's say that we're considering that the entire cosmos is alive. We're in a biofeedback loop with the world event. And suppose that you picture the Earth as like an amoebic form, floating in the plasmic river of the galaxy like cells that float in your bloodstream. Then you could picture that amoebic mass as a shape-shifting cell. It could contract into a spherical form. It could expand. It could expand into a spherical form. It could contract, flatten. Look at what a jellyfish does. Jellyfish sometimes flattens as it's swimming, doesn't it? It almost goes completely flat, and then it rounds itself out into a rounded shape, like a dome, an upper dome with tentacles hanging from it. So imagine a toroid amoeba floating in the living medium of the plasma of the galactic arms. This is a visualization. The galaxies as well expand and contract like jellyfish. I propose that one of the images of visualizing the galaxy is as a jellyfish or a medusa. So all of these things I'm saying are, like just suggestions. And they go to what I call the truly mysterious and the mysteriously true. So if I were to rephrase the quote from Castaneda at the beginning, I would say that what is mysterious is what we perceive. And even more mysterious is what makes us perceive. This is a mystery, but it's not a mystery in some woo-woo sense. It's not a new age, narcissistic fantasy of a mystery. It's a mystery in which every single awake, alive person can participate. And you do participate in it with every breath you take. Every breath in and out of you is holding you in this mystery. We've come to a threshold in the revelation of this mystery. This is the time of Sophia's correction, and that is a very great fact. So finally, I'm going to close by going to the ultimate riddle. Now you just asked me, John, I'm coaching you here. In your experience as a shaman, what is the ultimate riddle of the universe? Go ahead, ask me.
John, in your experience as a shaman, what is the ultimate riddle of the universe?
The Laya plane.
The Laya plane.
That's right.
How are you spelling that?
Laya. It's a Sanskrit word. It's derived from the Sanskrit root verb li, which means to dissolve or spread. So the Laya plane is the plane of dissolution. This is the ultimate riddle. As far as I'm concerned, it's the ultimate riddle of consciousness, it's the ultimate riddle of reality, the ultimate riddle of the manifestation of any and all worlds is the Laya plane, the plane of dissolution, which is the plane of the solution. Am I making sense?
Yes.
It's the plane, but it's also the pain. P-A-N-E. Now, what is a pain? You look through a pane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Behind you, there's a window, and in that window, there's a pane. Now, pain is by definition transparent, right? So I look through the pane, P-A-N-E, and I see the sky outside. The Laya plane is the pane of Maya. It's an infinitely flat surface with no boundaries and only one side. And you cannot make sense of what I'm saying. You can experience what I'm saying. In fact, I'm talking about it from experience. But even when you're in the presence of the infinitely flat plane without boundaries that only has one side, you can't make sense of what you're seeing. And I'll tell you, beyond that, you have a deletion experience. It deletes every single concept that you have ever formed, or every concept that the human mind is capable of forming when you behold this plane. Pain. This is the ultimate shamanic experience, and I've had it once with a second person. So, how do you reconcile the spherical paradigm of the earth with this concept of the cosmic plane, the Laya plane of dissolution? I would say that something is happening to people who embrace the flat earth paradigm, that they don't know what it is. Something is gripping them, something is impacting them, but they are misinterpreting what it is. I would be so presumptuous as to say this. I would maintain, I've never said this before, have I? Have we had this conversation before?
No.
I would maintain that something subliminal is breaking through into the human mind, which is convincing people of the flat earth. Because, as I understand it, when people say, yeah, I'm a flat earther, it's all not moving, the earth is at the center, everything moves around the earth, it's immobile, the earth is immobile, then they feel themselves standing on the earth and standing in the middle of the universe in a way that kind of, it gives them a rush. Maybe it gives them a dopamine hit. They get some kind of rush from that. They like that, right? And then they build and construct around that. Now, I don't go along with their constructions. One of the constructions they build around it is, oh, well, this means that we're really important. We're not just some animals on a dead rock hurtling through space, which is hurtling around the sun, which is flying around the galaxy and in the midst of millions and billions of galaxies, and we're totally insignificant. No, we're significant because we're solid, we're centered, nothing moves where we are, everything moves around us. I understand they could be convinced by that. But what I'm saying is they're verging on a mystical experience, and they are adding to it interpretations and conclusions which are entirely false. This experience of the infinite plane of Laya is always there, all the time. It's where you go in the ultimate state of yoga. It's the source. It's the Shiva plane. It's a surface with only one side. Look at a Mobius strip. Do you know what a Mobius strip is?
No.
You take a strip of paper, let's say make it an inch wide and 20 inches long. Okay? You have a strip of paper in your hands. You have your fingers holding one end and the other fingers of the other hand holding the other end. You twist the paper. You bring the ends together and you tape them together. That's called a Mobius strip. I used it as a symbol of mythophrenia. When you run your finger around that strip, you go through to both sides of the sheet of paper without going across the edge of the paper. You see, if I hold out that band of paper just flat, extended, in order to go from the bottom side to the top side, you have to go over the edge. But when you bend it into a twist and unite the ends together, you have a mobile strip. It only has one side. The flat plane of absolute infinity only has one side. It has no boundaries, and upon it, the worlds form as breath upon an obsidian mirror. So for me, as a sorcerer, this is a phrase from the Aztec cosmology, the ultimate vision is of this flat plane, which is a black obsidian mirror, the mirror of Tezcatlipoca, with drops on it. And those drops are the many worlds that are formed spontaneously out of the divine ground of consciousness. They are formed by consciousness to entertain itself. And it conceals itself in those worlds so that it can rediscover itself continuously. As Alan Watts said, it plays hide and seek with itself. So, who knows, maybe this feeling of the flatness is kind of breaking into the minds of some people, which has led them to this flat earth paradigm, which in itself is not sustainable and not provable. But what I'm talking about is sustainable and provable. And you can behold that flat plane, but you can never make sense of it, and it will remove your mind. The time that I beheld that flat plane, I came out of that experience, and I was aphasic for about 3 hours. So I'd been lying on the floor because I couldn't stand up because it was so overpowering. Finally, when I got up, I went into the kitchen of my house there where you spent so much time with me. And I went to the refrigerator and I stood there and I thought, what is this? I don't know what this is. The force of the habit of my body brought me to the refrigerator, but I looked at the refrigerator and I said, I don't know what this is. I had no word, I had no concept of refrigerator. I had no concept of anything. Because when you go that far into the depths of consciousness, to this parasamvit, the primal ground, it deletes all conceptions. And yet, emanating from that primal ground, there is a force, which is called Vimarsha, which is the mirroring force of the one-sided mirror of Shakti. Now, these are mysterious terms. They're probably familiar and maybe off-putting to some, probably unfamiliar and off-putting to some people, but I have to tell you, it's the best language I've ever found to describe these events. So on that note, I'll conclude, if you're in agreement.
Yes.
And I will just read the introduction, or the first paragraph of the book that I was writing on Flat Earth, the Flat Earth Riddle. And it goes like this. The earth is not flat, but the universe is. So it is argued in Hindu Tantra, a system of metaphysics derived from ancient yogis who were said to possess paranormal faculties that allowed them to detect the deepest design features of the universe. Due to the universe or ground matrix of all worlds being an infinitely flat plane or membrane, laya in Sanskrit, globular worlds appear to arise, like pictured droplets of breath on a mirror. And these globular worlds have both planar and spherical properties. Because they reflect the flat mirror, they have flat properties. Because they are globular enclosed units, they have spherical properties. But these properties fold into a mysterious merge so that physical features and perceptible properties come to be mingled and internested with each other. To work out how this merge works requires a background in Hindu tantric physics. For instance, see Mahamaya, The World as Power, Power as Consciousness, by Sir John Woodworth. Flat Earth theory, taken on its own, is an insidious psyop intended to attack human faculties of proof-finding and distract from the one coherent cosmological narrative produced by the human species, the Sophianic myth of Gnosticism. Unfortunate for those who have jumped on this bandwagon. But a solution comes in regarding the Flat Earth hypothesis as half of a riddle, and round Earth as the other half. Neither paradigm is totally true in isolation. Hindu Tantra cosmology presents the basis for a streamlined and intelligible syntax of a brilliant proposition called the principle of semblance. I've already described that so far in this talk. So finally, the physical structure of any world is a semblance of how it is perceived. The physical structure of any world is a semblance of how it is perceived. Material and sensorial properties arise from a common source, the infinite ground awareness, which is a flat, mirroring plane. Thus, the ancient seers of Mexico observed breath on an obsidian mirror.